Jim has done, I think, so much for the city of Nashville. I have such respect for his opinion that I always value hearing it, and it's important to me.
Not right now when you look at Vanderbilt and what has happened to Vanderbilt and its tremendous success, there's no question to me that the person who got the ball rolling at a time when it was really difficult to do was Jim Blumstein.
He is such a person of principle. It doesn't matter what somebody's politics are, it doesn't matter what somebody's background is, he cares about the quality of the work.
Jim was always somebody who, who thought about things like I hope that I do, which is that everybody's got a legitimate point of view.
Jim likes to say even a pancake has two sides. So we hear lots of points of view.
One of the highest compliments you can pay another lawyer is to say they are a lawyer's lawyer. And I can certainly say that about Professor Blumstein.
And all of his career has been based on the concept of the law professor as a servant to the community.
I think of Jim as a friend, a neighbor, and a teacher, and a great citizen of our great city.
I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I was born there and lived there through high school. And then I went off to New Haven to Yale for 8 years, undergraduate and then graduate in economics and law. It was just somehow always strange that there were about 10 Jewish students from Brooklyn every year that went to Yale. And then literature came out later that said, in fact, there was a quote-unquote Hebrew quota at Yale. My mother, my father, and I were going to North Carolina, and they had written for reservations to a hotel there, golfing hotel. And we got back an answer saying that they were full. And so Dad said, well, let's just go, and if we can't stay there, we'll find another place to stay, and maybe they'll have a cancellation. We drove in and went to the registration. They said, oh yes, we have space. And Dad turned and said, well, they must have had a cancellation. So the next morning we went to breakfast, and there were only 2 or 3 tables that were occupied. It became obvious that over the mail they saw our name was a Jewish name, and they told us that no room was available. Part of my concern about fairness for people and to treat people on their merits without discrimination and without favoritism is something that came into my experience early on.
If you think about the United States and how much we move and how every year millions and millions of people move. Well, when Jim moved to Tennessee, he was confronted with the Tennessee state law that required a year of residency before you could vote. And Jim challenged that law, took it all the way to the Supreme Court.
I went down to the polling place, to the place where the voting was going on in the primary, and I asked to register to vote. They said, well, you haven't lived here long enough. So I said, I can assure you that I have a job at Vanderbilt, so I'm not committing fraud, and I can assure you that I have above average knowledge of what the issues are. Why are you not allowing me to vote? You're fencing me out of the vote. So they said, well, we can't give you a knowledge test, and we trust you, but that's not the rule. The rule is you have to live here a year in the state and 90 days in the county, and you don't qualify. I said, let me cast a provisional ballot so that if ultimately I sue and prevail, my vote can be counted, and it will preserve my vote. I was listening on the radio, to public radio, and I heard a person on the street interview ask them what they thought about this new case that struck down the 1-year residency requirement, durational residency requirement, and the 90-day durational residency requirement. There probably was an opinion going to my, in the mail, but I hadn't seen the mail. I said, holy cow, I must have won this case.
I was working in New York, and he came up to New York, and I remember very vividly that we had lunch in the sort of the cafeteria at the World Trade Center, which of course isn't there anymore. I was talking about a voting rights case, and I mentioned how I wondered how it would all be affected by the Supreme Court's decision not that long before in the case of Dunn v. Blumstein. And I said to him something like, "That's interesting. Blumstein, is that person related to you?" And he said, "No, that I actually brought that case." Right away, I was very impressed with the fact that Vanderbilt had someone of that stature who had been so successful and had such a dramatic effect on the law in the United States, and it truly did have a dramatic effect.
Jim was very aware of the fact that in medical care, you probably get to an optimum amount of care long before you get to the amount that we actually deliver. He had a lot of expertise about the law surrounding what was going on with Tenure, but also understood how medical care worked and what some of the underlying dynamics we were trying to address were. He gave of his time and his expertise and his help, incredibly, and I think made a real contribution to what turned out to be a successful solution.
When I was working for Governor Bredesen, I must say that he was the classic example of what you would want in a political leader. He looked at the policy issues, the merits, what he'd like to do, whether he could afford it, and it was a totally policy-oriented, tough analysis approach.
I think we bought the state a decade anyway in terms of the cost of it not being totally out of control, and Jim had a lot to do with that.
I got very interested in the portion of the Affordable Care Act that expanded Medicaid and in essence forced the states to expand Medicaid. The Supreme Court had said that states could not be forced to join a federal program. They could be induced, but they could not be coerced.
And obviously his views on that were seminal and were extremely influential in the process, and that has been that's been the biggest change to the Affordable Care Act that's happened since its passage.
I was a member of the Leadership Nashville class in the early 90s, and Jim, of course, was one of the leaders of that, and he did a fantastic job. I mean, I thought his skills at getting people to talk, his ability to introduce the programs was just exceptional.
Leadership Nashville was founded in 1976, and in the second year, the organization got a grant from the Tennessee Committee on Humanities and had 4 humanists as part of the year, and Jim was one of the humanists, and he was the superstar. Jim was such an outstanding person that the 4th year he was added as a consultant, and Jim will be starting his 37th year with Leadership Nashville.
I think there was a belief on the part of the leadership of Leadership Nashville that facts don't speak for themselves, that they need context. What I've been able to do is to encourage people to really talk about real issues, not to dodge real issues.
I do know that Jim, in addition to being a consultant for Leadership Nashville, did a similar kind of consulting with Leadership Music for about 10 years. And he was a founder and is continuing to be involved with Leadership Law.
I contacted Professor Blumstein, who I had known through the Leadership Nashville program, described the project to him and asked him to serve on the steering committee. His input into that formation of that highly successful, nationally recognized lawyer leadership program was really invaluable. We really appreciated his commitment to the program.
We have about 1,400 alumni, and I would say Jim has probably worked with 1,300 of them.
I was offered a tenured position at Duke in the law school, and my wife, who taught in the German department there, was offered a job there as well. And the dean at the time at Vanderbilt Law School, Bob Canals, wanted me to come back to Vanderbilt. And he said, Jim, come help me build the school. And so for 4 years, I chaired the appointments committee at the law school, moving us into a national market.
The life that Jim led and the career that he was able to build was one of the attractions of coming to Vanderbilt.
Because of his love of the law, because of his love of his teaching, he has helped make this into what it is, a nationally ranked law school that is a desirable place for people all over this country to come and attend, and produces well-qualified lawyers. That's a great thing for Nashville. It's a great thing for Vanderbilt.
Tenure at Vanderbilt at that point in the early 80s was available to any person who had excellence in one of 3 areas: teaching, research, or service, and competence in the other 2. Joe Wyatt approached me to chair a committee on tenure standards called the CART Committee, Committee on Appointments, Renewal, and Tenure. And we put together a report in the 80s that basically recommended a change in the standard. It was eventually adopted, more or less, so that you had to be excellent in research, highly effective as a teacher, and competent at service.
He went through a lot of hell for that, and he, I think to a certain degree, probably paid a price because there was a lot of resistance, and in that sense you could see him as something of a revolutionary. He was instrumental in everything that makes Vanderbilt what it is now and makes it such an appealing school to students from all over the country and also to professors.
When Joe Wyatt left office, he said, and he wrote, that this process was the most important process that he had put in place during his time as chancellor, because not only did it change the legal standards, but it challenged folks from an aspirational point of view. I've been at Vanderbilt long enough now so that the scars are healed, and I can now be a consumer of the good things that happened, and it's now part of a culture. I have always tried to live by principles. My position has never been a partisan one. I have a strong commitment to helping folks based upon principles and broader themes that are important, and also developing ways that you can accept others' principles without compromising yours, and finding ways to accommodate mutual positions. It's important that you fight fair and that you also know how to win without gloating.
Jim has a nice ability to be able to explain some of these more complicated legal issues and constitutional issues in a way that ordinary interested people can understand them, which is not always true of every law professor I've ever met.
He has a great ability to help people see a different perspective, to see more than one side and not just 2 sides, but many sides.
He takes those skills and he takes that passion and he offers it to the community.
He has been very involved in cases in the community which have had a huge impact on the community and have helped many people establish their constitutional rights.
He's a very loyal person, and he cares about people, and he tries to support them. And I've seen that throughout his career.
Jim and I first came in contact with each other when I was a law student at Vanderbilt. Jim has been a big part of what's been so successful here at Vanderbilt Law School. My hope is that he hangs in here another 20 plus years and teaches a grandchild.
Really, the enduring lesson for me is really not to look at the bad through the rearview mirror, but always to keep your focus through the front windshield.